Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Joe Ditchett. He is the Industry Executive Advisor for Federal at SAP. Joe, good to have you with us.
Hey, thank you for having me here.
And increasingly, of course, this is not something that's revelatory here, but agencies are moving more of their administrative applications to the cloud hosting them. And today we want to talk about cloud-hosted procurement. What's going on there? What are you seeing? And let's get the big picture of the scope of cloud-based procurement. What's going on there?
Sure. Cloud procurement is really, it's a functional area like many others that we see in federal government. The federal government has many functions, right? From finance to HR. The acquisition arm and procurement within that is a very big part of what government does. At the end of the day, what should the government be good at? It should be good at buying goods and services on behalf of the taxpayer, and to provide those across the government and across their mission areas. Within the IT part of that, we see a lot of agencies and departments are embracing and moving towards cloud procurement and moving away from kind of these old processes that support federal procurement, federal acquisition, and taking advantage of what cloud promises, what it offers, to create a more secure environment for their acquisition processes, and many more things at that too.
Yeah, what are the advantages of cloud procurement versus your data center-based apps that they've been using for decades?
Sure. One of the easiest that probably most people point to is security, right? So you're taking advantage of what cloud providers are doing in terms of security. It's a faster security update, more complete in many ways. It's spread. The costs are spread across tenants and multi-cloud domains. So government agencies and departments can take advantage of a lot of the innovations in security. But beyond that, in the functional area, there are a lot of innovations that are going into the applications themselves to support federal procurement processes, to support federal procurement practitioners. So the government employees and workforce can take quicker and better advantage of innovations that come within the products themselves. And that extends into many things like better supplier relationships, better access to innovations coming from industry in support of government needs, and they're better and quicker and better positioned really to take advantage of the data that they're gathering in the process. And that data lends itself to data-driven decision making and really positions government and agencies and departments in the workforce in a better decision-making position in order to take advantage of what they have.
Yeah, that's a really good point, the idea of data and decision-making. That is literally the law of the land, and there's a lot of regulations to support the idea of data-based decision-making. Easier said than done. One of the big efforts is to put a lot of procurement information, history, prices paid into the high-def project, a database available to procurement across the government. So it's not the federal procurement database, but the FPDS is part of the data source for this high-def project, all cloud-hosted. So maybe discuss what organizations can utilize to have cloud-based data to support their decision-making. How does that work?
Sure. Well, I mean, the funny thing is that really is a challenge at first, right? Because you have to shift from cultural norms in a lot of cases and take some very specific steps in terms of your data strategy and data migration into a more modern environment, which is typically cloud nowadays, and the direction that both commercial and government are going in. And so you have a foundational data set. And then around your application architecture, you then have an engine behind that driving transactional data. And so as users interact or vendors interact with the application or the system, you're generating these massive data sets. Sometimes you might consider it like it's a strategic asset at the end of the day, the collection of data that's available to them. From that, you can gain advantage from using the cloud innovations to really do massive interpretation of historical data, do predictive analysis in terms of where we think supply chain disruptions might come from, where vendor disruptions might come from, and maybe even reveal some more prescriptive analysis, meaning that, hey, flag a particular vendor that might be at risk, or flag a particular vendor that might be meeting the attributes that I really want to pursue for this particular effort. Whether it's a technical pursuit or a small business initiative, we want to be able to take advantage of that. We want the government to really benefit from that. So a lot of that's housed in data. Being able to see what your past has been, and illuminate where you're going in the future. And that's all available through really kind of sound and disciplined data processes. And cloud-driven procurement and cloud-assisted procurement is really positioned to help government with that.
And you would want your data powering your decision making in the cloud along with your application. There's a lot of efficiencies there, and probably a lot less, maintenance and so forth you have to do when it's hosted locally.
Right. Things are much less manual. There's opportunity to automate them. And the good news about this is that the government can, with forethought, can make decisions about what it wants to automate and what it does not want to automate. Sometimes you want more human intervention. Sometimes you want less human intervention. But at the end of the day, you want your workforce working on the most important things to execute your mission. And you want the data to reveal a lot of that, a lot of the risks or challenges or opportunities that might be available to them, and the system behind it enabling them to do their job in a more efficient way. And it's a benefit to the taxpayer because not only are they getting the services and goods that they expect, but they're getting it in a more trustworthy and transparent manner than maybe what they have in the past. We're not searching for paper anymore. It can be called upon at the click of a button, or as we're seeing more and more of these days, with voice recall. You can talk to your systems in a new way.
And you mentioned earlier supplier relations. And how does that get enhanced by cloud procurement?
Right, so that's supplier relations. This is an interesting thing for the U.S. government in many ways. We have some traditional players in the supplier world, but we here in our kind of federal ecosystem of participants, we see a greater need and a greater demand for more participation in procurement, right? And that can come in small business, that can come in new and novel ways of providing products and services to the government. So creating essentially a network or a business network that reveals more vendors and creates a larger pool of vendors, and it helps with competition, and it really helps the government get a better product at the end of the day and a better service at the end of the day. Part of that, though, is a dance between the government itself and the community of vendors. There's collaboration that happens. And even after a vendor is selected, they go into contract negotiations. They go through redlining processes. They work through towards a final agreement. And if you're a government professional or an employee and you're trying to work with a vendor, and vice versa, a vendor trying to get access to the government in order to provide a product or a service, this networked base of suppliers is really a benefit to our government workforce, essentially.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a couple of benefits. One is in the area of market research.
Right.
Because that derives from greater visibility of the opportunities to industry in that sense. Fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. Market research, part of the process of establishing an appropriate acquisition is to conduct your research, to make sure that you've evaluated and vetted all of your potential offerings. But we really live in a pretty amazing place. We live in an amazing country, and there's dozens and hundreds and thousands, and there's a lot of people out there that are working on new and novel things all the time. The next great idea could be from the next who knows who, right? And we want to be able to see that so the government can take advantage of it. We see people doing amazing things in technology spaces, in healthcare spaces, emergency response. Being able to find those vendors, talk to them, collaborate with them in terms of what they might be able to offer, it can help educate government employees and government agencies to really move their requirement and mission set forward in a more meaningful way.
Okay. Where's this all headed, do you think?
Oh, right. So where this is all going, the next 3 to 5 years, I think is going to be a lot of work for a lot of folks to try and get off of kind of old processes and into new processes. The reality is that many agencies see this need already, and they're already taking steps to make their way into kind of more modern approaches to tech-enabled procurement and cloud-based procurement. But we've seen just in the last few months the kind of this move towards more automated, and when I say more automated, more artificial intelligence-enabled protocols, more data-driven opportunities for them. So we're going to see a lot more automation within these processes. So the government, and anyone really for that matter, is going to really need to think long and hard about where they want that to happen and where they don't want it to happen. Again, you want human intervention to make sure that you protect taxpayer dollars and that you're good stewards of it. but that really means making your workforce more efficient. And I think that automation is going to be a big part of that. And also, the government wants to be a model employer. And the workforce of the future is going to expect a lot of these automations to be readily available to them when they start their job. They're going to expect modern applications, modern technologies, and they want to start day one with it enabled, right? So the government's going to need to make decisions that's supporting their workforce of the future as well.
You know, SAP is at its root, started out as an ERP type of company, and so a lot of data-driven ideas have been at the core of what you've offered government and large organizations for a long time. In this new age of formal data-driven decision-making, in some ways it always was, you mentioned AI. That seems to be the big shift coming to data and to use of data is artificial intelligence. So how does that get baked into all of this, do you think, in enterprise systems that are in the cloud, where your data also is? Yeah,
we were really kind of in our infancy when it comes to a lot of this. I mean, we have a history of automating things where we could in the past. This is going to accelerate a lot, and there's going to be a moment of pause, or a moment where federal leaders can really pause and take a breath and see, how are we going to apply this? And right now they're doing their research. They're talking to companies like SAP. They're talking to other providers about what's happening in the world of AI. I see an iterative process to this. It's best to sample it, try it out, pilot it, prototype it. That way you can really see where it applies for maybe your immediate mission set, and then you can start building your strategy for the future. In the government, we really require a lot of trust in our technology, right? We expect it. And AI is starting to come into that fold a little bit, right? So we're going to have to build out new security protocols so we understand and we trust our AI algorithms and tools. We have a lot of professionals that are already working in that space, and that's a very big dialogue that's underway. The U.S. government at the executive level is working diligently to put a lot of these policies in place. And industry is also working with government in order to make sure that those policies are easy to interpret and executable, so we can essentially bake it into products. So it's there. And we're using these AI tools, large language models, and to better enable the execution of the process itself.
Yeah, because there's really two sides to it. There is the discretionary process where you have to make a vendor selection of best value with taxpayers' dollars to get what the government needs and so on, all of that. Then there's a whole big process tail to it, if you will, which is requisitions and contract writing. And it seems like the AI might initially be best used to automate all of that routine and free up people for the analytical part, which really will always require human discretion.
Absolutely, and there's an inherent connection to our acquisition and procurement process to a financial process, right? And we know very well at this point that the Congress expects our federal agencies to prove that they are auditable and that they can demonstrate their financial commitments and where things are, and that they can close their books properly and account for what they've spent their money on. Procurement supports that process, and being able to automate the back and forth between acquisition functions, procurement functions, and the financial reconciliations is paramount for success. And in order for, again, Congress and ultimately the taxpayer to trust and be transparent that we're executing their dollars in a meaningful way, and that we can account for where it started, where it ended, and what happened in the middle, it's going to be enabled by a lot of these automated processes. And it allows, essentially, if the AI is acting as a co-pilot, it'll allow the workforce to really see these, get ahead of them, and then furthermore build in trust, because there's with greater access to procurement, there's also greater risks associated with things like fraud or poor parts making it into the system. If you're building hardware and you need to make sure that you're not buying counterfeit parts, we want to make sure that our supply chains are robust to the 9th degree. We want AI to be a co-pilot for that, right? We want them to be able to crunch a large number of data points for us, because some of these transactions that these departments are putting together in the course of a year exceed the billions, right? It's not one person can sit down and look at all that all year long, right?
Yeah, so that augmentation of the workforce really, and you mentioned supply chains. the provenance of what things are being bought by the government and their suppliers and the suppliers, that's all really become very crucial, in the great power competition and worry about Chinese parts and so forth.
Sure.
And it sounds like the AI-enabled cloud data complex approach can rev that one up too, the understanding that you would have into the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can all see it from almost any seat that you're sitting in that things are speeding up and the supply chain is becoming more complex and the web is getting a little bit more difficult to interpret at times. And we're going to need tools to help us do that. And we're going to need trustworthy tools that can help us do that and ones that can see the bigger picture. In government procurement and acquisition, we have all different types of contracts, right? And we see big and little. And the big contracts have their own challenges, but the little contracts have their little their challenges as well. And what that shows us, though, is not necessarily that they are just buying little things, but they're buying little things in big quantities, right? So whether it's a complex contract or an acquisition that might seem simple, but has third and fourth and fifth layer cascading effects, these result in big numbers that ultimately cost our taxpayers dollars. They create inefficiencies. They ultimately lend themselves to mission failure. And we want to prevent a lot of that stuff from happening. So automated tools, artificial intelligence are really kind of the next step in the process of trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, especially what you say is true in spend control in the micro purchase area and in the simplified acquisition area. You know, those under 250,000 could be under $500,000 pretty soon if Congress decides to go along with that. But the idea is, yeah, each one is small, but they really add up to a lot of work.
They really
and yet
do.
You don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with each one because the whole point of micro and simplified is to not spend a lot of time on it. So it sounds like there's a great opportunity for spend optimizing in this approach.
Yeah, I would say so. And you know, when you're dealing with micro purchases and kind of these small things, but they're aggregating in numbers and times that you're doing it throughout the day and throughout the year, it can be very easy to miss trends in that spend process. And you can miss things because you get kind of used to the just the hand movement of just trying to get through it. It's not a lack of care. It's hard to see the trends when you're just looking at small things. And the ability to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture but still execute the immediate requirement is going to be a real need for a lot of our workforce. And they'll be able to see these bigger trends and make better decisions when they are executing on micro purchases.
Yeah, what do they say? You can save 10% on $1 million acquisition. You'll save $100,000. If you save the same 10% on 100 micro purchases, you've still saved $100,000.
Right.
So there's an amplifying effect by quantity of small procurement that sometimes gets overlooked there. All right, so people that want to move to this new cloud, AI-powered, data-driven decision-making, everything in the cloud, how do you get there? Especially the small agencies that may not be as far along as the CFO Act agencies. How do you get started? What should they do?
One of the challenges, and I'm going to probably go back to challenges here, but one of the is just kind of figuring out where you're starting from. And there are some federal employees that are pretty acutely aware of where they are, but being able to collect all of your analysis and talk to the market research like we mentioned a few minutes ago is really where you kind of start to build your navigation plan, right? And then you start figuring out how you're going to go. And for a lot of them, they already have built-in processes to evaluate cloud providers, but some of the smaller agencies might not. We do see instances across the government where they're trying to build what we call shared services organizations that might be able to provide for some agencies that might not be ready to make their own big deal in terms of a procurement. So they can take advantage of shared services, whether it's in procurement or finance. Then beyond that, I really recommend that once you figure out what your path is in terms of where you're starting, what your next step is in terms of cloud provider, it's really best to experiment fast and experiment as early as you can. So prototyping and piloting becomes really important. Pick a small scale use case if you can, and then have an idea of how you're going to take that and scale it into a more productive way. That gives you a lot of things that you can really build upon in terms of building out a new program for your agency.
All right, some good classic advice. Great to
Yeah.
have you with us today.
All right, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Our guest has been Joe Ditchett. He is the Industry Executive Advisor for Federal at SAP. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Industry Exchange Cloud.